Hey guys, tonight we dive into the twisty, tangled, and often hilarious saga of how medieval Europe managed to turn something as simple as a calendar into a multi-century mess of confusion, contradiction, and cosmic level clerical errors. Okay, picture it. You're living in a world where March is the new year. Someone else calls it the third day after Candlemas, and a traveling monk mutters calends of February under his breath. Good luck figuring out if it's Wednesday. December is the 10th month, like it says on the label, and if you ask someone what day it is, they might give you a Saint-esque name, a moon phase, or a shrug. The air smells like wax, musty parchment, and disappointment. Why disappointment? Because the monk just realized he's listed the wrong year. Again. And this isn't unusual, it's practically tradition. You're wrapped in a cloak, maybe, trudging through mud to your village's market square, and you overhear someone say, "It's the feast of Saint Bridget." The seller says the price is higher today because it's a fast day, but which one? You're not sure. You don't even know what date it is, okay? And the seller doesn't care. Now, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Probably both. But by saints, feasts, sunrises, and the opinions of your local priest. Imagine your tax forms do just as daffodils bloom. That's right, the calendar year would tick over in spring. The calendar is not a tool. It's a battlefield of conflicting systems and stubborn traditions, starting not at his birth, but at the supposed date of his conception, 9 months earlier. It's March 25th. There are lunar calendars, Roman-style calends, and Ides, saints' feast days, and the golden number system used to track Easter. It's like a bingo card of medieval mayhem. So, in this time-looped logic, Christ begins existing before he's born. Try entering that in a spreadsheet. Do we move it? The older monk sighs, says nothing, and drinks from a mug labeled, "I can't even." Better safe than excommunicated, she supposedly said. The wedding cake went stale. And hey, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Its face is faded. It's the bells chime noon, or maybe matins, depending on your viewpoint. No one seems to agree. But it's all running on overlapping calendar systems that make even the simplest events, when to hold a wedding, a complicated gamble. How? In our world, it's so automatic. It's digital clocks, synced phones, countdowns. But back then, today could mean different things depending on whom you asked and where you stood. The room is marble, not wood, and outside, the voices chant in Latin, not Old English. Welcome to ancient Rome. You sit up, stretch, and it hits you, no longer in the Middle Ages. You've been time-jolted backward. The shepherd docenti need to know whether it's 1289 or 1290. So, the calendar in royal charters may list a completely different year from the calendar in your monastery's Easter table. It's the same day, 2 years. The only folks really tangled in the calendar web are monks, tax collectors, and kings. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes in a candlelit room where a monk is scribbling dates into a thick, calfskin-bound book. Welcome to the late Middle Ages, where the new year doesn't begin on January 1st. Instead, depending on where you are, it might start on March 25th, December 25th, or even Easter because it moves, so why not make it harder? Oh, and sometimes it's September 1st, or March 1st, or November 1st, but we'll get to that in a minute. You trace the mess back to Rome, where ancient civil servants juggled months, intercalary days, and the whims of powerful men. You probably won't survive this without a calendar cheat sheet. But it wasn't always this way. Right now, you're just trying to buy fish at the market. That's the world you've wandered into, one where time isn't measured by clean numbered boxes on a wall. One mainstream fact. By the late Middle Ages, March 25th, known as Annunciation Day or Lady Day, was New Year's Day in many parts of Europe, especially England. And if you're thinking, that sounds insane, well, historians still argue whether this choice was symbolic or purely bureaucratic. Okay, now here is a French tidbit. Some medieval calendars also counted years of the reign of Christ. As you leave the market with questionable fish and a lingering sense of temporal despair, you pass a carved stone clock tower. And here's the kicker. Most people don't care what year it is. Your neighbor can't read. People are born, crops are planted, debts are paid. Speaking of kings, some like to start their own regnal years on the day they took the throne. But don't worry, there's always more ways to measure time, okay? Well, if tomorrow's March 25th, it's also New Year's Day. Better start preparing, again. You peek into a scriptorium where a younger monk whispers to an older one, "Father, the Annunciation falls on a Sunday this year." That's your life now, okay? And yet, somehow, society functions. One noblewoman famously delayed her marriage 3 times because no one could agree on whether it was a fasting season or a feast day. As you curl into bed, your candle burning low, you think about the concept of today, and tomorrow you wake up again. Same bed, same scratchy blanket, but something feels older. This is where the seed of all that medieval calendar chaos was first planted. Hey, and if you think it's confusing now, wait till you see what the Romans were working with. You stumble out onto a cobbled street where toga-wrapped officials bustle with scrolls and calculations. They're trying to figure out what year it is, how long this year will be, and whether anyone remembered to insert the leap month. Not day, month. Because back in the Roman Republic, before Julius Caesar decided to calendar smash his way into immortality, the system was an absolute patchwork of improvisation. Originally, their calendar had just 10 months March to December. The year started in March, fitting for a society that saw War Mars, god of war, as the kickoff to everything. 2 leftover months, January and February, got tacked on later. Basically, like someone realizing they had leftover puzzle pieces and just glued them to the side, which explains a lot. Historians still argue whether the early Roman calendar was based on lunar cycles, agricultural needs, or just vibes. Okay. It was only semi-regular, and the Romans didn't mind. Okay. Well, until taxes, harvests, and military campaigns started getting misaligned by whole seasons. You don't want to march into battle in sandals in the snow, just because the calendar says it's spring. And here's your mainstream fact. The Roman calendar originally had 355 days, with an extra intercalary month occasionally shoved in between, February and March. It was supposed to keep the calendar aligned with the seasons, but it didn't, 'cause here's the kicker. Inserting that leap month wasn't a neutral operation. It was a political tool. Imagine you're a Roman pontifex, a calendar priest with the power to decide whether the leap month should happen this year. Hey, that's a juicy power. Your political allies need more time in office, or your enemies want an inconvenient vote. No leap month. Or extra leap month. Whatever works. Time itself is a political weapon. So you get inconsistencies. One year is 355 days. The next is 377. The next is 445. Rome's entire calendar is swinging wildly out of sync with the solar year. Farmers are planting winter wheat in summer. Priests are blessing harvest festivals while trees are still bare. You, trying to keep track of it all, are aging faster than the calendar can keep up. Now for a quirky tidbit. Romans didn't number their days in a straightforward way. They counted backward from fixed point gallons, nones, and ides. So instead of March 12th, you'd say the 3rd day before the Ides of March. Confused yet? That's the idea. When Julius Caesar finally arrives on the scene, he's not just interested in conquering Gaul and becoming dictator for life, he also wants to fix the calendar. Or, at least, make it less embarrassing. He calls in an Alexandrian astronomer named Sosigenes, because, when in doubt, ask Egypt. Together, we scrap the lunar-based nonsense and drop a bombshell reform. The year will be 365.25 days long. Leap years every 4 years. January will start the year. Simple, solar, sensible. Well, mostly. The Julian calendar is born in 46 BCE, and the first version is nicknamed the Year of Confusion. Why? Because to realign the seasons with the new system, Caesar adds not 30, not 60, but 90 extra days. People aged a whole extra quarter of a year just on paper. It's like binge watching winter. Suddenly, you're in a world with 12 regular months, each with a set number of days. The leap year system is meant to keep things tidy, but there's a problem. People misapply it. The new rules are misunderstood, especially by the priests left in charge after Julius's very famous stabbing incident. So for decades, leap years happen too often. The calendar gets nudged off course. Augustus Caesar has to step in and say, okay, no leap years for 12 years straight. Let's fix this. This leads us to our final comic note of the day. Augustus didn't just fix the calendar. He also took a month for himself. July had already been named after Julius. Augustus gets August. And because July had 31 days, well, guess who also demanded 31 days for his month? Hence, all that 30 days hath September. Stuff. Yep, it's royal ego math. So here you are, trying to go about your life under a calendar that's technically solar, but practically unstable. Every emperor tweaks it. Every region interprets it a little differently, okay? And as this system travels into Europe through Roman expansion, it plants the seeds of future medieval confusion. You pass a Roman bathhouse, okay? A gossiping merchant waves and yells something about the calends of Sextilis. You nod politely and pretend you understand. You don't, huh? But you're beginning to realize that the medieval mess you saw earlier wasn't born from carelessness sits. The overgrown garden of Roman bureaucracy and imperial politics passed down like a cursed heirloom. The Julian calendar becomes the official backbone of timekeeping for the next 1,600 years. Not because it's perfect, but because no one could come up with anything better that everyone agreed on until they tried. So for now, you're stuck counting backward from the Ides, watching emperors rename months, and waiting for anyone to just number the days in a row. You sit beneath the statue of Julius, bronze and towering, and wonder if he ever imagined that his calendar would someday spark riots in 18th century Britain. But let's not jump ahead. You're still in Rome, and you're late for the Feast of Terminalia, the celebration of boundary stones and borders. You have no idea what day it is, but that's okay. Neither does anyone else. You blink once, and the marble streets of Rome dissolve beneath your feet. You're on a muddy hillside now, watching a man in a robe pace with purpose. He's holding a scroll, muttering numbers, and waving off the sheep blocking his path. The year is somewhere around 100 CE, and the Julian calendar is technically in place, but, not perfectly. You follow the man, he's a local magistrate, to a dim, smoky room with low beams and shelves stacked with clay tablets. He's here to record a debt payment, but he frowns. Did the leap year happen last year? He asks a scribe. The scribe shrugs. As one brings bread, you begin to understand. Julius may have declared a fix, but centuries later, people are still trying to make it work. The Julian calendar promised order. 12 months, 365 days. A leap day every 4 years. Clean, predictable, but the way people use it, that's another story. One mainstream fact. The Julian system miscalculates the solar year by just 11 minutes and 14 seconds. Small, right? But over time, it adds up one extra day every 128 years in medieval Europe. Oh, they definitely felt it. Fast forward with me centuries whoosh by. The Roman Empire splinters. The western half crumbles. But the Julian calendar, patched and dragged, limps onward into medieval monasteries and royal courts, where its rigidity collides with the world built on seasons, saints, and superstition. You're now in a 7th century abbey. The abbot is arguing with a visiting bishop. One insists Easter is on April 14th. The other swears it's the 21st. Neither is wrong. Technically, they're just using slightly different interpretations of the Julian rules. This is your first taste of medieval calendar drift, where a fixed system creates new chaos when reality keeps moving. And remember, leap years are still a bit of a mess. In some kingdoms, scribes forget to add the leap day. In others, they add it twice. One royal scribe reportedly inserted the February 29th in one year, leading to what scholars politely refer to as recording inconsistencies, and less politely as utter nonsense. Historians still argue whether these mistakes came from poor math skills, lack of training, or just medieval clerks getting paid by the page. And here comes a quirky tidbit. Some villages had local calendars layered over the Julian one. Think of it like calendar cosplay. A region might celebrate New Year's not in January or March, but on the feast of their local patron saint, Saint Wigbert's Day. Wigbert's not on any official calendar. Doesn't matter. Stay is New Year's here. So you might be in year 900 in one village, year 901 in the next, and year Wigbert for just over the hill. Time isn't universal, it's stubbornly local, and it gets better. You're now helping a monk copy the calendar section of a manuscript. You spot a mistake. March has 32 days. You point it out. He shrugs. We do things differently here, he says. The ink dries. The error becomes gospel. This isn't a joke. Medieval manuscripts often carried calendar tables with regional modifications. They stuck, because most people couldn't cross-check against Rome or Constantinople. Okay? The church calendar, filled with saints' days, vigil days, fast days, and feast days, cave-structured, but also built its own walls of confusion. There were hundreds of saints, many overlapping, one to mark time. Good luck choosing which saint's day to honor. One woman in 11th century Burgundy tried to settle a legal dispute over a debt's due date. The agreement said by Michaelmas. She insisted that meant September 29th. Her neighbor insisted it meant Old Michaelmas. October 4th, they took it to court. The court said, yes, everyone just paid the fine. But at the heart of it all lies the Julian calendar's main flaw. It feels stable, but it's drifting ever so slightly. Each spring, the sun rises just a little earlier than it should, and by the 10th century, the spring equinox, the thing the calendar was supposed to track, is now happening around March 11th instead of March 21st. Nobody notices right away. Then everyone does, but no one agrees on what to do. And yet, medieval timekeeping keeps going. You help tend the abbey garden. A friar uses the stars to guess when Lent should begin. Another consults a carved wooden wheel with little notches for Easter. It's like medieval Excel. Excel was on fire and written in Latin. Still, you start to understand the strange charm of it. Time isn't some inhuman clock grinding forward. It's woven into the seasons, the festivals, the sun and moon. It's as much about filling the time as measuring it. But that doesn't mean people weren't frustrated. A scholar from Bologna writes angrily that he missed a feast because one calendar listed it on the calends of April, and another on the first day of April. Same thing, it's totally different days in context. He ends his letter with a single word. Why? You leave the monastery at dusk. The bells ring for Compline. Someone says, tomorrow is the 1st of April. You glance at the moon. You say, sure it is, because here's the sleepy, swirling truth. The Julian calendar didn't break. It sagged, slowly, unevenly, and as the centuries rolled by, the weight of local customs drifted equinoxes. And holy day confusion turns this fixed system into a rickety old ship, patched with feast days and prayers. You stretch your legs in the twilight and gaze at the stars, which haven't moved, but your calendar insists they have. And tomorrow, well, we'll step deeper into the Middle Ages, where things get weird, like 8 different New Year's weird. But for now, rest easy. You survived another day in a world where March sometimes has 32 days, and time is more suggestion than science. You wake up beneath a wooden ceiling, warmed by the soft crackle of a hearth. A rooster crows somewhere outside. You swing your legs off the straw-stuffed mattress and stretch. Don't get too comfortable. Today's the feast of St. Dunstan, maybe St. Lambert, or maybe the second Wednesday after Whitsun. Depends who you ask. It's the early Middle Ages now. The Roman Empire is dust. Kings come and go. But the Julian calendar still chugs along, like a forgotten cartwheel, rolling downhill, rusted, misaligned, and remarkably stubborn. You walk outside into a village square. There's a scribe at a table taking tax payments, a monk consulting a chart of stars, and a merchant swearing his rent isn't due yet. The problem? They're all using different calendars. You've officially entered the era of calendar mashups, grand medieval free-for-all, where the same date might mean 3 different things in 3 different places. And the best part, everyone thinks they're right. Mainstream historical fact. After the fall of Rome, Europe didn't inherit a unified calendar system. It inherited scattered traditions of timekeeping, each region adapting the Julian model with its own saints, local customs, and political preferences. Think of it like everyone having the same smartphone, but installing completely different operating systems. In France, some towns mark the start of the year on Easter. In northern Italy, it was Christmas. In parts of Germany, March 1st. And in England, as we'll soon see, March 25th became the go-to New Year. Why? Because that's when Gabriel allegedly told Mary she'd be pregnant. Naturally. And here's a fringe tidbit. Some towns invented entirely new calendars based on founding charters. One tiny alpine village used the date of their first bishop's sermon as year 1. They were on year 237 when you visit. The bishop, reportedly, stuttered the entire speech. You travel from town to town and quickly realize that asking for the date is dangerous. Someone in Bruges tells you it's the 4th of the calends of April. In Ghent, it's Palm Tuesday. A monk in Rouen simply says, "It is the Lord's year," and that is enough. Not exactly helpful when you're trying to figure out when to plant your cabbages. Historians still argue whether these differences were due to ignorance, independence, or good old-fashioned clerical laziness. Most agree it was a cocktail of all 3, with a generous pour of holy tradition and regional pride. Meanwhile, the church does its best to promote unity, but unity often just means follow our version. The Roman Church pushes a standard Easter table. The Celtic Church says, "No thanks, we've got sheep entrails and star charts." The result? Easter Sunday's one for your neighbors, one for you. It's great for sales, terrible for salvation. You sit at a long wooden table beside a noble's court. A herald is announcing the date of an upcoming harvest festival. On the morrow of St. Michael, he booms, which falls this year upon the 2nd Thursday after the Ember Days of September. You nod, sagely and quietly decide never to ask about Ember Days again. But there's something charming in all this chaos. The calendar isn't cold or mechanical, it's alive, shaped by the needs and quirks of each community. There's room for saints, stars, and seasonal smells. A woman offers you a small tart made for Candlemas. It's filled with dried fruits and dusted with snow. "You must eat this," she says, "else winter stays." You oblige. Tastes like apricots in vague fear. And while the Julian calendar still lurks beneath all these layers, it's slowly fading into the background. Instead of March 18th, people are more likely to say 5 days before Lady Day, or 3 nights after St. Joseph. You wonder why they even bother with months at all. And here comes your quirky moment. In 10th century Ireland, monks used dog heads, yes, dog heads, to mark feast days on their wall calendars. A smiling hound for joyous feasts, a frowning one for fasts. And if the dog looked like it was growling, don't even ask. You visit a monastery where the calendar is carved into a circular stone wheel It turns with the seasons, aligning fast days with phases of the moon. The monk tending it whispers, "Time is a wheel, brother," then promptly drops it on his toe. So how did anyone keep things straight? They didn't. You glance at a charter written in Normandy. It's dated in the 10th year of King Richard, on the eve of St. Egidius, when the moon was full. Try converting that into a modern date without pulling out 3 charts and an inhaler. But even amid the disarray, there's a strange kind of consistency. People expect the confusion. They navigate by habit, not precision. Everyone knows when Lent feels close. Everyone senses when the harvest festival should fall. Time moves like the wind, unpredictable, but familiar. You sit by a riverbank and watch peasants dunk their feet after a long day's labor. Someone asks if tomorrow is St. Crispin's. Another replies, "No, it's St. Barnabas." They argue gently, splash water, and agree that either way, it's a good day for bread. And yet, in the background, the problem grows. The equinox drifts. Easter shifts further from the season it's meant to reflect. Scholars begin to grumble. Skip the calendar was supposed to anchor time. Instead, it's becoming quicksand. But that storm's still on the horizon. For now, you're in the thick of the medieval Meshupa time, when every village might chart the year in its own rhythm. And no one blinks at that. You lean back, the stars flickering above. Someone nearby begins to ring a bell for evening prayer. The sound is soft, steady. It's time for Compline, or maybe Vespers. It's hard to say. But it doesn't really matter, does it? You stir awake before dawn, your bed a pile of straw, your dreams still tangled with saints and stars. Outside, dew clings to the grass, and the church bell is already tolling, probably for matins, though you've long stopped pretending to keep track. Today, you feel it in your bones. It's New Year's Day. You throw open the shutters. Children are running through the village with ribbons. A priest is blessing chickens. Someone throws a dried apple into a pot and shouts for St. Melania. You nod slowly. Happy ... March. You ask a passing stable boy. He shrugs. Could be. You're now living through the apex of the medieval calendar's confusion. A glorious, sleep-deprived moment in history when a single year could, and often did, have 8 different New Year's days, depending on where you stood, who ruled you, or which saint's relics happened to be stored under your local church. Mainstream historical fact. In medieval Europe, there wasn't a universally accepted start to the calendar year. Depending on region or institution, it might begin on 1. January 1st, 2. March 1st, 3. March 25th, 4. Easter, 5. September 1st, 6. December 25th, 7. The first Sunday of Advent, 8. Your king's coronation anniversary. You walk into a cathedral archive where a scribe is carefully labeling documents. You peer over his shoulder. One reads, Anno Domini 1374, begun March 25th. Another says, 1375, counted from Christmas past. A third, 1373, reckoned by Easter. Long live the king. Historians still argue whether these multiple starts were tolerated out of necessity, inertia, or a charming unwillingness to talk to neighboring cities. One theory says it was seasonal logiquae, make the New Year start during the dead of winter. Another says it was religious symbolism. A third says, basically, medieval people were tired and just wanted soup. You wander into a town square decorated with evergreen garlands. It's late December, okay? And they're preparing for what they call Kalenza, mishmash of Roman New Year's traditions and Christian rituals. Young boys run around in animal skins, singing ancient tunes. It feels old, too old, like Rome is whispering through the snow. Then January 1st comes, and half the town shrugs. That's the feast of the circumcision. Someone says, not New Year's. The other half insists it's both. A baker closes early and mutters, can't celebrate twice, but dough gets weird. Here's your quirky tidbit. In medieval Venice, the New Year started on March 1st in honor of Rome. Not January, not March 25th, but exactly March 1st. They called it the more Veneto style, Atia, and they stuck with it long after other regions gave up. Venetian nobles would sometimes write to dates on the same document just to cover their bases. Lawyers had a field day, and if you were a traveling merchant, good luck. You leave a city where it's still 1349, cross a river, and suddenly it's 1350. Cross another, and you're back in 1349 again. Your taxes, your contracts, your marriage license, everything depends on how the locals mark the year. One frazzled merchant is said to have carried 4 almanacs in his cloak, flipping through them like a gambler playing cards just to guess what day it was. His name, ironically, was Benedict Timewell. He died lost in the Alps, still arguing with a monk about what year it was. And yes, if you're wondering, double dating was already starting to creep in. Some scholars, desperate for clarity, began writing dates like March 20th, 1401 halves. It didn't help much. People just started calling these dates the cursed ones. You pass a tavern where the locals are preparing for yet another New Year's celebration, this time for the Annunciation on March 25th. This one's serious. Debt rolls reset. Legal contracts expire. Servants get rehired or fired. It's the fiscal year flip. You'd better not miss it. In England, this was the New Year's Day for centuries. You hear a steward explain to a confused cook, the year ends on March 24th and begins anew on Lady Day. So this is 1397. Until next Tuesday. Then it's 1398, unless you go to France. The cook blinks. What if I just don't? The steward pats his shoulder. No one will blame you. And now comes Easter fluid, drifting, astronomical Easter. In some places, it's the true beginning, start of the ecclesiastical year, the cycle of salvation. You attend a twilight service and hear the priest say, "This night, as the Savior rose, the year begins again." You feel it in your bones, even if your brain wants to scream. And the best part, Easter moves. So, if your year starts on Easter, the new year could land anywhere between March 22nd and April 25th. Imagine trying to plan a birthday party, or collect rent, or live. Still, in this swirl of contradictions, there's a strange kind of rhythm. People know their local customs. They feel them in their bones. Even the children know that Lady Day means lambs are coming, and Easter means planting beans. You pause in a village where an old woman is pouring ale into a carved wooden cup. "New Year," she says, with a wink. Happens 3 times a year, if you're lucky. You sip, and the drink is warm, spiced with honey, cinnamon, and chaos. And as you lean back, the church bells chime down midnight, but noon, which used to be the start of the day in some places, another layer of confusion, another quiet laugh from the calendar gods. So you take a breath. You stop asking what day it is. Close your eyes and let the wind tell you what seasons come. Tomorrow might be New Year's again, or it might not. Either way, your taxes are probably overdue. You blink into morning with flour on your sleeve, candle wax on your cheek, and the nagging sense you missed a deadline again. But don't worry, dates don't matter nearly as much as feasts do. You step into a world where people don't say March 18th or April 4th. Instead, they say the day after St. Cuthbert or the Friday before Lammas. Welcome to the feast day, first era, where calendars are basically holy mixtapes, less about tracking time, more about tracking holiness, hunger, and when it's safe to dance. The Julian calendar still exists. Sure, it's in the background, humming like a bad furnace, but it's the saints' days, fast days, moon phases, and seasonal festivals that really shape life now. Your daily schedule, your menu, even your ability to get married is wrapped tightly around this sacred, tangled timeline. Here's your mainstream fact. In medieval Europe, particularly by the 11th and 12th centuries, So the liturgical calendar based on the Christian year was more central to people's lives than the civil one. People oriented themselves by the religious rhythm: Advent, Christmastide, Epiphany, Lent, Eastertide, Pentecost, and on and on. You walk into a bakery, the apprentice offers you Lent loaf. It's made without butter, eggs, or joy. Why? 'Cause it's Friday in Lent. You ask the date. Hi stares at you blankly, then says, "It's 2 days past St. Gertrude." You nod, like that helps. Over in the village green, a man is carving the moon cycle into a slab of wood. He's predicting the next planting day based on the waxing crescent and the worm moon. You ask if he knows what day it is. He grins and says, "Not yet." You begin to realize the calendar is a living thing here, rooted in nature, belief, and the slow turning of the earth. It's not an abstract grid, it's a conversation between heaven and soil. Historians still argue whether this preference for feast days over fixed dates was due to poor literacy, deep religiosity, or just practical utility. After all, a peasant might not know it's April 22nd, but he'll definitely know when St. Mark's feast arrives. There's a parade and roast goose. Speaking of St. Mark, here's your quirky tidbit. In Venice, on St. Mark's Day, it was traditional to give your sweetheart a rosebud, but not just any rosebud. It had to be slightly wilted. Why? 'Cause love fades, and so must roses. It's Venice, beautiful and brutal. You wander into a monastery where a monk is making a calendar wheel. It spins through the cycle of feast-sculled pins from major events, tiny icons for saints, skulls for fasting days. It's oddly hypnotic. You spin it too fast, and it lands on Saint Godelieve, martyr. The monk makes you fast out of caution. There are literally hundreds of saints, each with their own feast day, and some of them double booked. You find 1 week where 3 martyrs, 2 bishops, and a confessor are all crammed into 5 days. It's like a holy traffic jam. You spot a dusty old manuscript listing feast days with cheerful marginalia. A pig dancing next to St. Anthony's Day. A loaf of bread beside Saint, and a menacing fish glaring out from Ash Wednesday. Because it's not just about remembering saints, it's about living with them. Feast days dictate when you work, when you eat, when you dance, and when you absolutely do not touch cheese. During fast periods like Lent or Advent, rich foods were forbidden. Butter had to be replaced with oil unless you bought a special butter license from the church. Yes, the church literally issued hall passes for dairy. You see one posted on the wall of a merchant's kitchen: "May Our Lady excuse thine butter. Amen." On a personal level, the liturgical calendar shapes your sense of time. Birthdays, rarely celebrated, but a name, day your saint's feast, huge deal. If your name is George, you're partying on April 23rd, unless you live in a region that moved George to May because he got bumped for Easter. Of course, even legal contracts use feast days for due dates. You look at a land deed, payment due on the 3rd Thursday after Pentecost. That could be in May or June, or whenever Pentecost decides to happen. Hope you brought a moon chart and a monk. Festivals add another layer. Midsummer's Day, Michaelmas, Lammasich, tied to ancient agricultural rhythms, folded neatly into Christian garb. But people remember the bonfires, the songs, the bread shared under twilight skies. The date? Optional. And it isn't just saints and moons. The zodiac still holds sway in some pockets of Europe. You overhear someone say, "Don't get married under Aries, a war sign." Another whispers that Virgo blesses harvests. The priest scowls, but says nothing. At court, astrologers and almanac makers chart time with elaborate diagrams. One shows you a wheel of time so complex, it might as well be the secret to immortality. In the middle, it simply reads, "God willing." And that's the truth, isn't it? The medieval calendar isn't precise, it's devotional. It humbles the individual. You don't bend time to your will. You submit to it. You live within its pulse. You sit by the fire at an inn as travelers argue about what feast is next. One says it's Corpus Christi. Another insists it's St. Elmo. A third just eats his meat pie and says, every day is a feast if you're lucky. So you finish your pie. The fire crackles. The ale is warm. Outside, bells toll for none or vespers or something in between. The moon is high. The saints are watching. And tomorrow is probably St. Barrel's Day. Or maybe it isn't. But you'll know when the geese start honking and someone gives you a wilted rose. You wake with sore feet and the vague suspicion that you celebrated the wrong. It's feast day yesterday. Again, no one seems to mind. Someone hands you a pastry and mumbles, for St. Rufus. You decide not to ask. Today, you're headed south to France. Not the tidy barrel-top version from postcards, but a medieval mosaic of dukedoms, city-states, and leftover Roman law codes, each with its own version of what day it is. You're entering a country that tries to fix the calendar chaos and, impressively, makes things worse. You arrive in Paris under a sky smeared with chimney smoke and the smell of baking bread. A scholar in robes bumps into you, drops a stack of parchment, and groans. I hate leap years. You help him gather his papers. One of them is titled De Computo Anni, a guide to the reckoning of the year. Another is just a doodle of a man punching a sundial. This is the France of the 13th century, ambitious, proud, and increasingly administrative. The kings want order. The bishops want uniformity. The bureaucrats want fewer angry letters from monasteries that swear it's still 1273. So, naturally, France takes a bold step. Calendar reform. Here's your mainstream fact. In 1564, long before the Gregorian calendar hits most of Europe, France officially changes its civil New Year's Day from Easter to January 1st. King Charles IX issues an edict, the Edict of Roussillon, bring uniformity across the kingdom. A noble idea. But centuries before that, French regions are already experimenting with their own tweaks, especially in the 12th and 13th centuries. You stroll through the streets of Lyon, where the local church uses Christmas as the new year, then travel to Provence, where they're still loyal to Easter. In Paris, they're flirting with March 25th. Everyone's trying to solve the same problem. When to turn the year over? No one agrees. Historians still argue whether France's early calendar adjustments were practical attempts at cohesion or power plays disguised as logic. Some say the move toward January 1st reflected growing influence from Roman civil traditions. Others argue it was simply bureaucratic panic. You wander into a legal hall in Avignon. The court clerk is trying to date a property claim. It happened on the Tuesday before Candlemas, the plaintiff says. In the year of our Lord 1304, the clerk narrows his eyes. Which 1304? He asks. Before Easter or after? Silence. Then someone coughs. And here's your quirky tidbit. In some areas of medieval France, leap years were marked not just by the addition of February 29th, but by special plays performed in town squares to explain the change. One account from Rouen describes a man in a sun costume debating a moon-costumed monk over who gets the extra day. The sun wins, but the moon steals the applause. Back on the road, you pass a group of traveling merchants arguing over toll dates. One says, the King's Road tolls reset on the feast of St. Remigius. Another insists they reset on the King's birthday, which no one seems to know. You keep walking, then you stumble into a cathedral school where students are learning the computers, the complex math used to calculate Easter. Their instructor holds up a chart filled with golden numbers, epochs, dominical letters, and moon cycles. One boy faints. The rest begin to pray. These charts are crucial, especially when your whole calendar revolves around Easter, but they're wildly difficult. One small mistake, one off-cycle moon, one misaligned equinox, and your entire feast schedule collapses like a poorly built lasagna. To make matters worse, scribes often copy computers tables with errors, which are then recopied for centuries. You find one old chart that calculates Easter as happening on March 35th. The monk who wrote it added a note, "I cannot explain this." And you begin to see the core of the problem. France, like much of Europe, wants precision, but it's trapped inside systems that resist it. It wants a universal time, but every bishopric, abbey, and bailiwick interprets universal differently. You attend a town meeting in Tours where elders debate when to start the planting season. One elder consults a farmer's almanac, another consults St. Benedict's feast. A third insists on waiting until the cuckoo sings thrice. Surprisingly, they all agree by sunset. And it's not just feast days and planting. Taxes, tithes, leases, everything has a due date, and those dates shift depending on which calendar you're following. It becomes common to double-date contracts or add clarification notes like reckoned from Christmas past, not the one coming. You look at one such contract. It's 40% Latin, 60% apology. You stop at a tavern in Burgundy. The innkeeper toasts the new year. It's April. You raise your mug anyway. Which year, you ask? He smiles. All of them. Then gives you another drink. And that's France for you, a kingdom trying to reform the calendar centuries before the rest of Europe would follow. But doing so in patchwork with edicts, experiments, and occasional puppet shows. Still, the effort isn't entirely in vain. Over time, more regions warm to the idea of a fixed new year. January 1st begins to creep back into popularity, not because it makes more sense, but because it's stable, predictable, cold and dry, but comforting in its consistency. You walk outside, the stars crisp above, and realize something strange. In this swirling vortex of calendars, France is one of the first to say, let's just pick a day and stick with it. It'll take another few centuries, sure, but the idea is there. It's the idea that maybe, just maybe, time can be tamed. You exhale into the frost. Someone nearby is singing a song about Saint Genevieve. You've lost track of what day it is, but that's fine. You'll find out again at the next feast. You're up before sunrise, following the sound of bells and the muttered complaints of a sleep-deprived priest. Today is important. It's the day they try again to calculate Easter. You ask what day that will be this year, and 4 people give you 4 different answers. One of them also hands you a hard-boiled egg and says, better safe than sorry. Welcome to the nerve center of calendar chaos. Easter, the most important holiday of the Christian year. The hinge of the entire liturgical calendar, and the single most frustrating date to calculate in medieval Europe. It moves every year, not in any sane, seasonal, first Sunday in April sort of way. No Easter is based on the moon. Let's get your mainstream fact out of the way. The Council of Nicaea in 325 CE decreed that Easter should fall on the first Sunday after the first full moon following the vernal equinox. Sounds simple enough until you try to actually do it. Because now you need to know when the spring equinox occurs, when the full moon occurs, and which Sunday follows that full moon. Don't forget to adjust for leap years, regional variants, and whether your scribe remembered to carry the one. You step into a monastery in York. There's an entire room filled with scrolls, diagrams, and stones painted to resemble moon phases. A monk in the corner is weeping softly into a copy of Bede's De Temporum Ration on the reckoning of time. You hand him a crust of bread. He whispers, I lost the Dominical letter. This isn't just high-stakes math. It's theology, astronomy, and politics all rolled into one. If you mess up Easter, you mess up everything. Lent, Pentecost, Ascension, Corpus Christi. It's like misplacing your house keys and discovering you've also lost the kitchen, the garage, and your left shoe. Historians still argue whether early Easter reckoners were more influenced by lunar charts or ecclesiastical tradition. Some say they used actual observations of the sky. Others insist it was all pre-written cycles complex tables that just claimed to represent the heavens. The truth is probably both, plus a bit of wishful thinking. Now for a quirky tidbit. In some Celtic Christian communities, monks were so committed to their version of the Easter calculation based on an 84-year lunar cycle that they celebrated Easter on a different Sunday than the rest of Christendom for over a century. They even kept their own tables, like defiant teenagers refusing to update their phone software. You're now in Ireland in the 7th century, watching this conflict unfold. A council is being held. On one side, the Roman Church, cool and collected with their updated computer system. On the other, the Irish monks, bearded and fiery, clutching ancient lunar charts. This is the famous Synod of Whitby, 664 CE. The debate is fierce, not about doctrine, not about sin, but about when, exactly, Christ rose from the dead. One Irish monk dramatically throws his Easter wheel across the room. A Roman cleric picks it up and says, "You forgot a leap moon." Everyone gasps. Eventually, the Roman method wins mostly for political unity. But even then, confusion reigns for centuries. You walk into a Spanish abbey 300 years later, and they're still using a different method. Old Computus, the monk says. Still good, strong bones. Meanwhile, the Julian calendar continues to drift. Remember that sneaky 11-minute error per year? Well, by the 14th century, the spring equinox is no longer landing on March 21st. It's more like March 11th. That means Easter is now detached from the actual astronomical equinox. You're celebrating resurrection while the trees are still in hibernation. But nobody's panicking yet, not publicly. You attend a whispered meeting of scholars in Paris. They're quietly comparing equinox charts and lunar tables. So one of them sighs and says, "We're 10 days off." Another replies, "Don't say it too loud." And here's the worst part. If Easter is misaligned, the entire liturgical year is off kilter. The fasts fall too early. The harvest blessings come before planting. The Feast of St. Michael happens during the worst part of lambing season. It's a sacred domino effect. You wander into a village festival where they're celebrating Pentecost. In April, you gently ask, why? The priest scratches his head and says, "It's the moon's fault." Okay, someone throws flower petals at him. He nods and says, "That's fair." By now, you've probably seen a Computus table. If not, imagine a grid filled with numbers, Latin abbreviations, moon symbols, and mysterious letters like E and G that supposedly point to Sundays. It looks like a cursed Sudoku. Medieval scholars copied them by hand, often introducing errors. And yet, they were sacred if your Easter table was wrong. Your whole monastery was spiritually off balance. Some monasteries even fought over it. One chronicle from Germany notes a minor skirmish between monks over the date of Easter. It involved thrown ink pots and one very unfortunate chicken. You sit with a wandering friar who has no books, just a carved wooden stick with moon notches. He uses it to guess the date of Easter based on his own travels and gut instinct. "I go by goose song," he says. They know when he rose. You don't argue. Eventually, even Rome can't ignore the problem. The calendar drift is visible. The equinox is early. The heavens are no longer lining up with holy time, but a solution isn't coming yet. It will take a pope, a leap of faith, and a lot of angry peasants. It's still a few centuries to go. For now, you rest near a chapel window, watching the full moon rise. A young novice sits beside you, flipping nervously through a Computus chart. "Do you think I've got it right?" he asks. "I mean, what if I fast on the wrong day?" You pat his shoulder. "At least you'll be alone at the table." He laughs. Kind of. Because in this era, time is sacred but slippery. Easter is the center of the year, but the center won't hold. Not yet. Not while the moon keeps wandering and the equinox slips like a loose thread. So you lie down. The moonlight spills across the stone floor. Someone in the distance is practicing Gregorian chant. And you think, if they ever do fix this calendar, They'd better not mess with the feasts. You wake 2 bells again, a deeper tone, this time heavier, more deliberate. Someone important has arrived. You peek out at the abbey window and see an entourage of men in velvet and scarlet, hoisting banners with keys and triple crowns. Rome has entered the chat. You're in the late Middle Ages now, and the Catholic Church has had enough of moon charts that don't match, Easters that fall in the wrong season, and monks flinging inkpots over computers' errors. It's time for some good old-fashioned PayPal micromanagement. Today, you're following the rise of the ecclesiastical calendar machine, the slow but determined efforts of the papacy to clean house and impose a single, orderly liturgical framework across all of Christendom. And spoiler alert, it goes about as smoothly as trying to herd cats with incense. Here's your mainstream fact. By the 13th century, the Church in Rome was actively working to standardize liturgical time across Europe, issuing papal bulls, reforming saints' calendars, and pushing for unified Easter tables. And with the advent of the university system, particularly in Paris, Bologna, and Oxford, the pressure to have a single, agreed-upon calendar only grew. You walk into a scriptorium buzzing with nervous energy. The abbot has just received a letter sealed with papal wax. All Benedictine monasteries must now adopt the Roman Easter reckoning and adjust their feast calendars to match the new standard breviarium. One monk mutters, again. Another groans. This is the 3rd time since Lent. You ask what the big deal is. The abbot throws up his hands. It's the office of terce. That's what? The new version moved it earlier, and now St. Osmond is out, and St. Dominic's in. You nod wisely, making a mental note that terce is a prayer hour and not, as you guessed, a kind of hard cheese. The Church wants unity, not just to please God, but to manage a vast empire of souls. If every cathedral and cloister is celebrating feasts on different days, it's hard to preach consistency. Worse what if a traveling bishop shows up to say Mass on Corpus Christi, and the locals already did it last week? Historians still argue whether these reforms were more about spiritual purity or political control. Likely both. A unified calendar meant centralized authority, less room for local interpretations, fewer rogue saint days, and more weight behind Rome's word. It was, in a way, an attempt to flatten time. But of course, people are attached to their timekeeping. You see it firsthand in a little hill village where the priest refuses to remove St. Justina's feast from the calendar, even though the latest Roman missal doesn't mention her. She saved us from the thunder plague, he says, firmly. No one asks follow-up questions about that. And now for your quirky tidbit. In some German abbeys, local saints were given honorary feast days that were never approved by Rome, but got celebrated anyway for centuries. 1. Saint Radegundus, the brewer, had a day marked with free ale and a moratorium on confessions. The Vatican was not amused. Back in Rome, the pressure is mounting. They're issuing more liturgical reforms, standardizing saints, and sending emissaries to scold bishops, politely or not. Some accept the changes, others nod politely, then keep doing things the old way. You find yourself inside the Vatican's dusty archives, where scholars are hunched over manuscripts trying to reconcile various regional calendars. One cardinal says there are 13 different versions of the Feast of St. Martin. Another adds, and 2 of them are in the same week. They both sigh and go back to copying. And yet, it's not just about saints and prayer hours. It's about the structure of time itself. Rome wants every church to observe the same Advent, the same Lent, the same Easternet. They want you to use their calendar tables to calculate it. So they distribute universal computers guides. You watch one monk receive a shiny new set of Easter tables. He stares at it for 10 seconds, then mutters, "This will ruin the turnip harvest." You ask how? He doesn't explain. The church is fighting against generations of local traditions. Some towns mark the beginning of Lent by burning straw dragons. Others ring bells until the sun goes down. One monastery insists that Maundy Thursday always includes lamb stew. Despite clear instructions from the new PayPal missile to stick with fish. You ask why? They whisper, because the lambs are already here. You begin to see what the papacy is up against. Not just incorrect math, but entire cultures of time layered over centuries. They're trying to synchronize not clocks, but human rhythms. And those don't like being moved. Still, progress happens. Over the next few decades, more regions adopt the Roman breviary. Monasteries revise their calendars. Saints get demoted, promoted, or quietly removed. Hey, new standard slowly emerges, like paint covering old frescoes. You'll hear a monk whisper, St. Ethelberg is gone. Another nods solemnly. She lasted longer than most. Meanwhile, the Julian calendar continues to drift. The equinox is now off by 10 days. The church notices. They issue warnings, but no reform comes yet, just polite documentation. You feel like someone is waiting for the right moment, perhaps the right pope with a stomach for backlash. That moment is coming. But for now, you walk through a cloister where the chant echoes through the halls, perfectly timed with the bells. The new calendar is in place here. The rhythm is smooth, even if the monks still grumble about the loss of Saint Tibertius. A younger monk pulls you aside. Ka, I heard in Venice they still use Easter as the New Year, he says. Do you think that's a sin? You pause, shrug, and say, only if the Pope's visiting. He nods, reassured. You both return to Vespers. The church has made its move. The reforms are spreading, and, while not everyone likes them, the idea is taking root. Time belongs to Rome now, at least, until someone dares to rewrite the entire calendar. You rest your head against cool stone and think, not for the first time, that nothing on earth is harder to move than a feast day. You wake up wrapped in wool blankets, a soft drizzle tapping against the shutters, a fire crackles lazily nearby, and someone in the next room sneezes with medieval flair. You're in England now, deep, misty, stubborn England, and just when you thought things couldn't get more confusing, they do. Because, unlike some parts of Europe that flailed and flinched their way toward calendar uniformity, England commits not to clarity, not to consistency, but to its own special brand of orderly nonsense. The new year begins on March 25th. That's right, while much of the Christian world begins flirting with January. First Tour at least considers the logic of aligning with the Roman Church's reforms. England doubles down on Lady Day, the Feast of the Annunciation, as the first day of the civil year, and it does this with absolute conviction. For over 500 years. Let's start with your mainstream historical fact. In England, from the 12th century through to 1752, the official New Year's Day used in legal, civic, and financial records was March 25th. That means March 24th, 1600, is followed by March 25th, 1601. The new year starts 9 months before Christmas. Try making a birthday invitation with that. You step outside into damp air and overcast skies, the streets of York slick with drizzle. At the town hall, a scribe is writing in a registry. March the 24th, in the year of our Lord, 1417. He pauses, takes a breath, then flips to a new page and writes, March the 25th, in the year of our Lord, 1418. No cake, no horns, just bureaucracy. Historians still argue whether the choice of March 25th was primarily theological, symbolic, or bureaucratic convenience. After all, March 25th marked the Annunciation. The moment the Virgin Mary is told she'll give birth to Jesus, it's a spiritual conception of the year, a new beginning. Also, it lines up nicely with tax season. Go figure. And yes, taxes are involved. A lot of England's financial systems, including rents and tenancies, revolved around quarter days. Lady Day, Midsummer Day, Michaelmas, and Christmas. Lady Day is the most important teats. When leases start, debts are settled, and servants are hired or dismissed. For most people, this is when the real year begins. You wander into a village market where everyone is bustling about with a strange kind of urgency. Not because it's spring, but because it's New Year's Eve. On March 24th, there's even a bonfire. A boy throws a turnip into it and yells, "To last year." A woman corrects him, "To the old year. This one starts tomorrow." He shrugs. Same thing. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some English towns, people believe that children born just after midnight on March 25th were blessed with extra knowing, while those born on March 24th were 1 year too early, like the milk left out too long. One poor lad was even nicknamed Old Ear Alfie for the rest of his life. He became a priest, but this system created enormous headaches. You read a letter dated February 3rd, 1720. It's followed by another letter sent just 5 weeks later, dated March 10th, 1719. That's not a mistake. According to England's system, the year doesn't change until March 25th, so January, February, and most of March belong to the previous year. This is where things start getting spicy, because England's neighbors, Scotland, France, Spain, switching over to the Gregorian calendar, started using January 1st as the new year. England looks at that, raises an eyebrow, and says, "No, thank you, for now." So, naturally, double dating starts to creep in. You find a will written in February 11th, 1701 halves. That little slash is doing a lot of work. It means this is 1701 by English reckoning, okay, but 1702 in places that start the year on January 1st. You're living in 1 year, key, but mailing letters to another. The time travel is subtle but constant. One London merchant grumbles that he missed a shipment because he confused old style and new style. He shouts at a sailor, "I said the 10th of March, not that 10th of March the next one." The sailor just leaves, probably to France, where the new year starts in January like a rational society. You wander into a legal office where 2 clerks are arguing over a property deed dated March 20th, 1602. So, was that before or after the new tax law? One asks. Depends. The other says, did the law follow the court calendar or the royal one? The first clerk sighs and says, let's just burn it and start over. Probably for the best. Even England's poets complain. John Donne, the metaphysical mood king himself, once wrote that the date doth dally with the soul. A courtier responds by throwing his calendar into the Thames. Tisn't help. And yet, amidst all this chaos, the March 25th New Year persists. For centuries, generations grow up knowing nothing else. Children are taught that Christmas is a holy day, but Lady Day is when the year truly begins. If someone says next year, they mean after March. Probably you sit beneath a blossoming tree, the first buds of spring pushing their way out into the gray air. A shepherd nearby counts lambs. It's 3 born before the new year, he says, and 1 after. You check the date. It's March 25th. One day changed the bookkeeping forever. The year is tilting forward now. But England isn't ready to let go. Not yet. Lady Day is familiar. It's woven into rent rolls, crop cycles, religious feasts. Okay? And maybe, just maybe, just feels like a beginning in a way that January doesn't. More daylight, more birdsong, more mud. Still, there's a storm brewing. Across the channel, the Gregorian calendar waits like a smug, clean-shaven cousin with a pocket watch. It's 10 days ahead. It starts its year in January. It doesn't do this weird March 25th thing. Soon, it's going to come knocking. But for now, you walk through an English village celebrating the new year with meat pies and hymnals, and no real idea what year it is outside their own hedgerows. You check the date in your notebook, March 25th, 1637, also known as March 25th, 1638, also known as Lady Day. Happy New Year. You're lying in a creaky bed, half covered by a lumpy quilt and the smell of boiled leeks. When you reach for the small notebook you've been keeping, you open it to yesterday's entry, March 10th, 1,701 halves, and you stare at it for a long time. It doesn't get any clearer, because now you're in the thick of it. The world of double dating. A delightful, medieval, and early modern invention where one date simply wasn't enough. You needed to, for clarity, okay? Which, ironically, made things even more confusing. You toss aside the covers, get dressed, and head down to the tavern. The barkeep is arguing with the lawyer about a lease signed on February 15th, 1641. The problem? One insists that was during winter. The other insists it was last year. They both have a point. Let's break it down with the mainstream historical fact. Between the 14th and 18th centuries, especially in England and its colonies, legal and religious documents often had to use 2 years, one by the old-style calendar, where the year changed on March 25th, and one by the new style, where it changed on January 1st. So, document dated February 10th, 1,641 halves, is technically February 10th in the year 1641, according to the English system, and 1642, according to much of continental Europe. And people had feelings about it. You see it in letters, wills, and even gravestones. Someone dies on March 5th, 1710-11, and the mason has to carve both years into the stone. You imagine his muttered curses with every chisel stroke. Pick a year. Historians still argue whether this practice of double dating was clever adaptation or bureaucratic surrender. Some say it was a noble attempt at clarity during a period of transitional chaos. Others say it just made things worse, like putting 2 different maps into the same glove box. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some parts of colonial America, ministers recorded births in their parish books with double years, but reversed the order, writing 1,702 over 1 instead of 1,701 halves. Why? Possibly because they were unsure which system their bishop preferred, or possibly because they were just tired. New England winters will do that. You head over to the town's chancery, where a clerk is updating the record of a marriage contract, dated January 12th. He murmurs, "In the year of grace, 1698. He hesitates, then writes, carefully, 1,698 nights. You glance at his ink-stained hands and realize he's written this over 100 times this week. He notices your stare. "You think we enjoy this?" he asks. You say nothing. People start gaming the system. You meet a sly merchant who schedules debt repayments for March 24th. Why, you ask? He grins. Because the year hasn't turned yet. Kai, get 3 months delayed. No one can say I'm late. Kai, you have to admire the hustle. But double dating isn't just for trickery. It's also for avoiding war. You hear a tale of 2 cities, one French, one English, who almost went to battle over a royal decree delivered in the 2nd month of the year, 1629. One thought that meant February. The other thought it meant April. Swords were drawn. Priests were consulted. Finally, someone pulled out an almanac, and the war was canceled. And then there are the ordinary folks. The peasants, the craftsmen, the midwives. Shh. You meet a woman who keeps a household calendar made of stitched linen. She's recorded births, deaths, sheep sold, debts owed, all with overlapping dates. My Thomas, she says, was born in 93 or maybe 94. Depends who's asking. You nod respectfully. You find a tavern wall where patrons have scribbled dates of significant events. One reads, "Drunkest night, January 3rd, 1,705/6." Someone added, "Confirmed," with a small drawing of a tankard. Even the drunks understand double dating. That should tell you something. You leaf through a court record listing fines. Assault committed on February 28th, 1,651 halves. You wonder if the punch landed in one year and the legal paperwork in another. Probably. Even royalty isn't immune. You read about King Charles I's execution, listed by English records as January 30th, 1648, but French records call it 1649. same sword, different years. And don't even ask about publishing. One book from Oxford has a title page dated 1695, a dedication dated 1696, and a printer's note saying completed January 12th, 1695-6. You put it down gently and walk away. But here's the thing. Despite the confusion, people adapt. They learn to navigate the overlapping numbers, the awkward slashes, the question of which system are you using. It becomes a fact of life like rain, or taxes, or St. Swithin's Day. Still, the pressure is building. Every year the world runs on two clocks, one for England, one for the rest of Europe, creates more tension, more bad contracts, more missed treaties, more frustrated gravestone carvers. You walk through a snow-dusted cemetery and see one final marker, worn and musk-covered. The date reads, February 29th, 1721 halves. You squint. Leap year. Someone nearby says, he really went for it. You smile, because even in the mess, there's something beautifully human about this. People trying to make sense of time, to tame it, to mark it down, even when it refuses to cooperate. But don't get too comfortable. England's double dating habit is about to run into a PayPal plan and a 10-day vanishing act. Because next, we meet the man who finally decides enough, and yes, he has a very pointy hat. You wake up with sunlight in your eyes, and 10 days missing from your life. Seriously? You were asleep. It was October 4th, and now it's October 15th. Somewhere in between, time got erased like chalk off a board. You rush outside, and no one's panicking, just muttering. An old woman at the well says, they stole my laundry day. A baker growls, I lost my son's birthday. A monk nearby shrugs. The Pope said it was fine. Welcome to the Gregorian overhaul, the moment in history when the world admitted the calendar was broken and tried, finally, to fix it. And they did it with a bold, magical-sounding maneuver. Just delete 10 days. Mainstream historical fact. In 1582, Pope Gregory XIII introduced a reformed calendar to correct the Julian system's growing drift. Remember that 11-minute error per year? It had added up. The spring equinox, which should have landed around March 21st, is showing up around March 11th. This was throwing off Easter, the liturgical year, and the entire rhythm of Christian timekeeping. So Gregory ordered a reset. To bring the equinox back in line, the church dropped 10 days from the calendar. October 4th, 1582, was immediately followed by October 15th. Poof, 10 days gone. You're standing in the Vatican, watching the Pope's advisors sketch the new calendar on parchment, scratching out the old dates like an overzealous editor. Gregory XIII sits nearby.com, surrounded by mathematicians, Jesuits, and astronomers. The calendar must serve the heavens, he says, not the other way around. You don't disagree. Historians still argue whether the Gregorian reform was driven more by religious urgency-keeping, Easter correct, or by the Renaissance passion for scientific precision. Probably both. Of course, it helped that the Vatican had no intention of letting Protestant territories fall further out of spiritual sync. Unity, after all, has a deadline. Here's your quirky tidbit. In Rome, the 10 missing days passed with surprisingly little drama. People adjusted, cued secret October 9th birthday parties in their wine cellars. One cheeky pamphlet advertised rooms available only on the 12th of never, but in other parts of Europe, things were less smooth. Spain, Portugal, Poland, and Italy adopted the Gregorian calendar immediately. Catholic solidarity. But elsewhere, you cross into Protestant lands, and suddenly things are very tense. England, for example, wants nothing to do with the popular calendar. One bishop scoffs, if the papists jump off a temporal cliff, must we follow? So they stick with the Julian calendar and let the drift continue. That means by the 1600s, different parts of Europe are now operating on different dates. You could leave Paris on October 20th, arrive in London the next day, and be back in October 10th. You meet a Flemish merchant who carries two daybooks, one labeled Old Style, the other New Style. He flips between them like a magician performing an exhausting daily trick. It's always yesterday or tomorrow, he sighs, but never quite today, and just wait for the wedding disasters. One noblewoman in Bavaria schedules her wedding for October 14th, sends invitations to Rome and Geneva, and half her guests miss the ceremony entirely because they're on the wrong calendar. She marries alone. Her uncle, arriving 5 days late, says, "Well, at least I missed the buffet." Meanwhile, the Pope is basking in the glow of reform. His team has developed new leap year rules to fix the Julian error. Century years would only be leap years if divisible by 400. So, 1600, leap year, 1700. Nope, it works. Slowly, carefully, the calendar tightens its grip on the sun. You're handed a new almanac first edition, hot off the press. Gleams with dates that actually line up with astronomical events. Equinox, gate where it belongs. Easter, reasonably predictable. The Computist monks start to smile again, but the reform's rollout is uneven. You visit a German town where half the population uses the Gregorian calendar, and the other half sticks with Julian. One baker celebrates Christmas on December 25th. His cousin celebrates it on January 4th. They exchange gifts on January 1st, just to be safe. In Sweden, things get weirder. The king wants to adopt the Gregorian calendar gradually by skipping leap years over several decades. It fails spectacularly. In 1712, Sweden goes backward, adding a leap day to correct its earlier corrections. The result? A one-time only date, February 30th, 1712. Yes, it existed, and no one's entirely sure how to celebrate it. You pause under a tree where two scholars are debating the reform. One insists Gregory's calendar is a triumph of science. The other growls that it's papal tyranny disguised as astronomy. They settle the dispute with a game of dice rolled on a feast day that may or may not exist, depending on which calendar you're using. And then there are the people. Normal people. The ones who just want to plant their barley and pray on the right days. They don't care which calendar wins. They just want to stop aging 10 days in a single night. Some grumble about the lost time. "The Pope stole 10 days from my life," says one widow. "He can keep the first 3, but I want the rest back." Few peasants riot in small towns, shouting, "Give us back our days." A noble mutters, "I'd settle for fewer Mondays." But for all the noise, the change holds. Slowly, country by country, the Gregorian calendar spreads. Not because the Pope demanded it, but because it works. It lines up with the sun. It smooths out the leap years. It fixes Easter. Eventually, even skeptics start to accept it grudgingly, like bad medicine. You sit by a window, flipping through an old Julian calendar, then the new Gregorian one. The days line up. The seasons match. Something feels calmer now. Not perfect, but saner. You close your eyes. The world still spins, but at least it does so on time. You wake to shouting loud, angry, public shouting. You bolt upright, rush to the window, and see a crowd of people in the street waving banners and throwing vegetables. One of the signs says, "Give us back our 11 days." Another says, "It's still September, you thieves." And you're in England, finally catching up to the calendar game and, predictably, doing it with flair, drama, and public outrage. It's 1752, and the British Empire has just done something it resisted for almost 2 centuries. It officially switched from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar, and, because of the accumulated drift, it had to drop 11 days. September 2nd was followed without warning by September 14th. That's right, 11 entire days simply vanish from the calendar. You go to bed on the 2nd and wake up halfway through the month. Somewhere, a cat has missed its feeding schedule by a week and a half. Mainstream historical fact. The Calendar Act of 1750, passed by the British Parliament, brought Britain and its American colonies in line with most of Europe. It set January 1st as New Year's Day and implemented the Gregorian system, leap year rules and all, beginning in 1752. And the people, well, they didn't all take it well. You walk through the markets of London, where rumors are spreading like spilled beer. They've stolen our lives, someone growls. 11 days, just gone. The king owes me 11 breakfasts. One vendor posts a sign, all fish now 1 penny cheaper, to account for lost time. Historians still argue whether full-scale riots actually happened or whether the give us back our 11-day story was exaggerated by political cartoons and later myth. But there's no question. People were confused and, in some cases, deeply upset. Here's your quirky tidbit. In the months leading up to the reform, some landlords tried to charge tenants for the full month's rent. Even though it had been shortened by nearly half, tenants pushed back loudly. One man reportedly refused to pay until his 11 lost nights of snoring were reimbursed. In the countryside, many simply ignored the change. You wander into a village in Devon where an old farmer still swears it's September 5th. I saw the moon last night, he says. She's not moved 11 days, I'll tell you that. His wife, planting turnips, agrees. The Pope may shift days, but he can't fool my seeds, and that's part of the problem. For many people, especially rural folk, the calendar wasn't just dates on a page. It was how they aligned with the land, planting, harvesting, brewing, breeding. It's change that felt like yanking time itself out of the soil. You overhear a preacher warn his flock not to trust a calendar that removes time without repentance. Meanwhile, in a pub down the road, someone toasts to the lost days. May we sleep through all our future mistakes just as peacefully. But it's not all outrage. Some people embrace the change with weary relief. You visit a London printer, setting the year's first Gregorian almanac. He smiles and says, "About time, don't you think?" He flips through the clean, well-spaced pages. It actually works now. Imagine that. Even the financial world adjusts, though not without hiccups. Remember all those old quarter days based on March 25th? They remain, but now they're out of sync. To keep things simple, the British tax year eventually shifts to April 5th, still echoing the old Lady Day, plus the 11 lost days. That's why, to this day, the UK's tax year starts on the 5th of April, a faint calendar ghost. You walk into a courtroom where a magistrate explains that, yes, if you signed a contract for September 10th, it doesn't exist this year. You'll settle on the 14th and like it, he mutters. The defendant sighs. The court scribe doodles a sad moon in the margin. Across the Atlantic, things get just as confusing. The American colonies, under British rule, make the switch at the same time. Benjamin Franklin calls the change a necessary correction, though one letter to a Boston paper insists that the missing days are sure evidence of Satan's arithmetic. You spend an afternoon with a Puritan widow who refuses to adopt the new calendar. God gave us the old one, she says, folding laundry with grim precision. He wanted us to skip days, he'd have struck them from the sky. You nod and back away slowly, but gradually things settle. The new year now begins on January 1st. No more March Madness. Leap years follow sensible rules. Easter stabilizes. Dates across borders begin to agree. Merchants, lawyers, and yes, those beleaguered gravestone carvers breathe easier. Still, the change leaves echoes. You find a tavern hosting an 11 nights wake each September, offering free ale to anyone born between the 3rd and 13th. Their motto, celebrate what was never born, but always remembered. You visit a grave with no date, just a carved message. She was born between the days the stars forgot. You pause. It's oddly poetic. Back in Parliament, ministers debate whether the reform was worth the fuss. One mutters, We modernized the kingdom and started a riot. Another replies, time was never going to be tamed without blood and paperwork. And in a quiet cottage on the edge of town, you meet an old man who still keeps 2 calendars. One Julian, one Gregorian. One tells me when to work, he says. The other tells me when to dream. You ask him which one he follows. He winks. Depends on whether I want to pay taxes or take a nap. And so England joins the modern time stream at last, but not with a clean slate, with a few bruises, several confused sheep, and a cultural memory that still whispers, remember when they stole the days? You wake in the present day, or something that smells suspiciously like it. There's a radiator humming in a corner, an LED clock blinking 7 a.m., and a smartphone buzzing nearby with a calendar reminder. Quarter day. Rent. Due. Wait. Quarter day. That shouldn't still be a thing, should it? And yet, it is. Today, you're surrounded by fluorescent lights, wireless networks, and automatic daylight-saving updates, and somehow, fragments of that medieval calendar still cling to everything. You thought the Gregorian reform swept it all away? Not quite. Time, it turns out, is a hoarder. Let's start with your mainstream fact. Several aspects of modern life, particularly in the UK and its former territories, still echo medieval and early modern calendar systems. These include fiscal years, tax deadlines, legal terminology, and even a few religious holidays that have outlasted the saints they were named for. You open your phone and scroll through the year. April 6. That's the start of the UK tax year. Why? Because it used to be March 25th Lady Deba, when the Gregorian calendar cut 11 days. April 5th became the adjusted equivalent. Add a little legal slippage, and boom, April 6th it is. The ghosts of Julian England are still collecting taxes. Quarter days persist, too. You find them in lease agreements, church tithes, and obscure financial contracts. Lady Day, Midsummer, Michaelmas, and Christmas. Landlords still use them, so do some schools. And more than one confused new tenant has asked, what's a Michaelmas? You walk past a British university where the terms are still named after them. Michaelmas term, Hillary term, Trinity term. A student sipping coffee says, don't ask. Just show up when the bells start. You check his calendar, synced to Google, yes, but it's still whispering medieval names into the modern semester. Historians still argue whether these calendar fossils remain out of tradition, laziness, or an unconscious reverence for seasonal rhythms. Whatever the reason, they persist quietly, stubbornly, like saints carved into old stone, even after their chapels have fallen. And here's your quirky tidbit. In Scotland, the ancient quarter days were known as the term days, and for centuries, people marked them by lighting bonfires, settling debts, and ... evicting tenants. In one case, an Edinburgh landlord held a quarter-day dance party before serving legal notices. Nothing says your rent's going up like a hornpipe in a meat pie. You flip open a printed calendars, yes, they still make those, and find a note in tiny font on September 29th, Michaelmas. No mention of dragons, saints, or angelic warfare anymore. Just a shrug in the margins of modernity. And speaking of angels, you check the Catholic calendar. It's still thick with feast days. St. Bridget's, St. Lucy's, Ascension Thursday, Pentecost, Candlemas. Time still dances to the rhythm of holy days, even if fewer people notice. The liturgical calendar hasn't vanished, since just waiting patiently behind the digital clock face. Even your holidays are echoes. Ever wonder why Easter moves? It still uses the Computias, that same arcane lunar formula from the 4th century. The full moon after the vernal equinox, the Sunday following that. It's as alive now as it was when monks carved moon cycles into wax boards. You check next year's date. Easter falls on March 31st. You sigh. So does your vacation plan. You head into a bank where the fiscal year doesn't begin in January, but in April. An accountant explains, it's just tradition. You ask, whose? He shrugs. Someone really old, probably a monk, probably with ink stains on his fingers, and a vendetta against January. And you don't have to go far to find more relics. School terms in many Commonwealth countries still nod to the old ecclesiastical calendar. Legal documents still reference old-style verses. New-style dates. Genealogists regularly stumble into double-dated records, and Lady Day, baptisms that throw family trees off by whole generations. You visit a historical society where archivists still train volunteers in how to read time properly. They whisper like librarians guarding a secret spell book. One shows you a ledger marked February 10th, 1696 sevenths. You nod, pressed, and also bewildered. Just call it winter, she advises. You walk past a city hall in the U.S. where the local government, modern, shiny, efficient is, holding a Lammas fair in early August. You ask what Lammas is? Councilwoman replies, no idea, but we get good turnout and sell a lot of bread. Fair enough. And that's the thing. The calendar isn't just a tool. It's a ritual, a rhythm, a song you may not know the lyrics to, but you still dance when it plays. You think back to those wandering medieval monks with their moon charts and computers tables. You remember the ink-stained court clerks with double-dated contracts? The peasant who insisted her rent wasn't due until the second Thursday after Whit Sunday. You laugh, 'cause now, in the age of atomic clocks, there are still people saying, I'll get to it next, Michaelmas. And let's be honest, you have probably delayed something by saying next week when you meant whenever the stars align. Time may be more precise now, but it's still delightfully weird. The bones of the old calendar are buried under our smartwatches and productivity apps. But if you listen closely, between the emails, between the clicks, you can still hear the faint toll of a distant bell calling you to Vespers, or maybe rent is due. Either way, it's probably April 5th. You wake up in a library, not a digital one, a real one, wooden shelves, dust motes, old leather bindings, the scent of parchment and patience. Time feels slower here, or maybe more honest. You're surrounded by the calendars of centuries, some neat, some deliriously scribbled, some rolled like scrolls, others folded into creaking books. And here, in this quiet place, you start to see it. Calendars aren't just about dates, they're about power. Because when we talk about the world's most confusing medieval calendar, we're not just talking about a wonky set of months and misplaced leap days. We're talking about a map of structure imposed on time itself. A declaration of who gets to define when things begin and end. Mainstream historical fact. Across history, calendars have always been tools of control. Emperors renamed months. Popes fixed the heavens to fit Easter. Kings declared when the year began. Revolutionaries built new calendars to erase the old gods. The moment you draw a grid on time, you are deciding whose reality matters. You walk past a display case. Inside is a page from the French Revolutionary Calendar, late 18th century experiment in calendar rebellion. 12 months, each with 3 10-day weeks. No Sundays, no saints, just decades and harvest names like Brumaire and Thermidor. It lasted 12 years before France quietly tiptoed back to Gregorian normalcy. People tried to reset time to reboot history with a new calendar. But time, like a tired mule, rarely changes course without complaint. Historians still argue whether our reliance on the Gregorian calendar today is a matter of science, faith, or simply inertia. After all, it's not perfect. It still drifts a little, still juggles odd month lengths and leap years, but it's become the de facto map of the planet. If you're late for a flight, you're late in Gregorian. You find a chart showing how different cultures measure time. The Hebrew calendar, the Islamic Hijri calendar, the Chinese lunisolar cycle, the Ethiopian calendar, still trailing the Gregorian by 7 years. They each carry their own logic, their own rhythm, and none are wrong. They just belonged to 2 different ways of seeing the world. If you think about those medieval folks, confused, yes, but not necessarily lost. Their world was layered. Time was layered. You could live in the church's year, the farmer's year, the market's year, the king's year, and often all four at once. And here's your quirky tidbit. In some 15th century towns, scribes didn't even bother picking one calendar system. They just glued them together. One book from Barcelona includes Roman numerals, Julian saints' days, lunar cycles, and local Catalan feast codes. There's a note in the margin. Check with Father Gonzalo if unsure. Gonzalo probably didn't know either. You sit at a reading table. A historian across from you says, calendars are the visible skin of invisible belief. So you ask him what that means. He shrugs. It means we organize our lives around what we think is important, what we want to remember or forget. You think back to the 8 different New Year's days, the saints who organized your week, the monk who mourned the loss of St. Tibertius, the Englishman who missed his rent by 11 days' end, the widow who refused to accept that October 10th had never existed. You remember how time in the Middle Ages wasn't flat, okay? It had texture. A fast day felt hungry, okay? Feast day smelled like roast meat. Candlemas shimmered. Michaelmas echoed with geese. Today, your calendar app dings, and you click dismiss. You flip through a 16th century almanac and notice a note next to April 23rd. St. George's Day. Plant beans. Do not argue with sisters. Excellent advice. Honestly, you stand and walk to the window. Outside, the world is still humming. Time marches, minutes ticking forward. But you've learned something now. Calendars don't just count time. They shape memory. They enforce structure. Matea, they decide what matters. When the church insisted Easter must be right, it wasn't about moon math. It was about keeping salvation on schedule. When kings refused the Gregorian switch, it wasn't about decimals. It was about not being told what time it was. You sit once more, now holding a digital tablet. You scroll past weeks of your own life meetings, birthdays, reminders, all stacked in tidy boxes. You add one more entry. Remember, March 25th used to be New Year's. Just a little reminder. A secret tribute to all the monks, farmers, popes, and poets who tried, sometimes desperately, sometimes hilariously, to make time make sense. And now the room softens. The clocks seem to hush. The old calendars around you stop buzzing. The journey is almost over. You've made it, time traveler. Close your eyes and let yourself drift, carried on the soft ticking of imagined gears, the gentle rotation of a world trying its best to stay in sync with the sky. You've wandered through candlelit abbeys, past moonlit fields, across confused marketplaces, echoing with feast days and false starts. You've listened to popes and peasants argue over dates, while the stars remained exactly where they always were. Breathe in, let go of the numbers, the slashes, the double-dated contracts and scribbled marginalia. Time, after all, isn't just something you measure. It's something you feel. The hush before morning. It's a stretch of sunlight across a kitchen table. It's the way a year sometimes flies and sometimes hangs heavy like wet wool. You've seen how messy it's always been, how each calendar is really just a guess, the best attempt at naming the dance between earth and sky. And yet, we keep trying, not because we need control, but because we crave connection to the seasons, to each other, to the stories we tell ourselves about beginnings and endings. So, as you slip into sleep, let the old bells fade into memory. Let Lady Day drift by. Let St. Tibertius bless your dreams. There are no missing days here, no double years, just this moment, quiet, gentle years, and tomorrow, well, tomorrow will come, just as it always has, even if no one can quite agree on what day it is.